Welcome everyone to episode 56 of the Brandon Adams podcast. I have with me Jared Dillian. Jared is the author of the daily Dirt Nap financial newsletter. He's the author of 3 books, including Street Freak, All the Money in the World, and most recently, Those Bastards. Jared, I finished the book this morning. I absolutely loved it. I have many questions for you. I hope that I don't irritate you by digging into this book.
I do have to correct you for a second, though. I do have to correct you.
Sorry.
The second book is called All the Evil of This World.
Oh,
which is an amazing book. Amazing, but very, very filthy, very dirty. So if you want to read a novel that takes place in the financial world that is disgustingly filthy, then go read that. So
you mentioned in your latest book that that's a very poor marketing strategy.
Yeah, it really is.
If people are ashamed to recommend your book, it's
yeah. Yep, Those Bastards has already done much better. So
I have a similar experience where I wrote a book that, like, one-on-one I get many compliments on. It's called Personal Organization for Degenerates. So it's like literally personal organization for people that are not inclined towards organization in any way. And it's, I think, like a very important book for a certain type of person. And it's sold a shocking number of copies, especially in audio form. But I feel like people don't recommend it because it's sort of, if they recommend it, it implies that they're a degenerate. But then again, I wouldn't necessarily change the title because somehow the title, especially in conjunction with the cover illustration, perfectly explains what it's about.
Cool.
The marketing, though, for those, it can be quite difficult. If people are, for one reason or another, title or content, hesitant to recommend your book, that is a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so among the items that you drop in your essays, you say that you're writing 3,000 to 4,000 words a day. That is a stunning quantity. Can you take us through your method, your daily schedule?
Yeah. So every day I write the daily Dirt Nap. So that's 1,500 words right there. I have a weekly newsletter from Malden Economics, which is about 1,000 words. I have 2 monthly newsletters, which are about 1,000 words each. I have a Substack newsletter that I send out every 5 days or so, which is about 1,500 words. I'm going to school. So I have a bunch of assignments for school, which, I just finished one that's 2,100 words. And gee, what else? Yeah, that about covers it. Yeah. So, it's a lot. It's a lot. Oh, and also, podcasts, writing up notes for my podcasts. Those are generally about 1,000 words each. So, yeah.
So you write at one point in the book that successful people are obsessive to a level that many cannot fathom, cannot understand. And I take it that you're quite obsessive in your methods. For one thing, I've never seen you make a mistake, which is a high compliment. Some people say a definition of genius is that the person makes no mistakes. I have a good copy editor eye, and I didn't catch a single mistake in this book, and I never caught a mistake in your work. So that's high compliment.
Thank you. I do make mistakes. Sometimes big ones, but you just haven't seen them yet.
So you have noted in your book that you do take some tough trade-offs. You work most of the time and forego exercise and certain things, like you're working quite a bit. So take us through the schedule each day.
Well, so at the moment, I have an office for my newsletter business, the Daily Dirt Nap. So I get up around 6:30, get dressed, drive into the office. I'm in the office around 8. Uh, I work until about 3 or 4. Come home, eat dinner, and then I sit on the couch and work until about 10 at night. So that's my typical day. I probably end up working about 10 or 12 hours a day. So, I mean, look, like I think in the book, I talk about this idea of comparative advantage, you know, like you should do more of the things that you're good at and less of the things that you're not good at. Right. So I'm not an athletic person. I did play racquetball for years and I got to be pretty good at racquetball. And then the pandemic happened and I stopped going to the gym and I never went back. So I'm super out of shape. I'm 6 feet tall. I'm 240 pounds. I could probably stand to lose about 40 pounds. So, but it's just that it's not for me. It's not a priority. I want to keep working on the things that I am good at to get better at. And one of the things that I've been doing actually in my free time is writing short stories, which I haven't released yet. So, like, my next goal is to write a short story collection. And I think I'll need about 15 short stories. I've written 5 so far, and I'm really, really happy with them. So, that's another thing that I'm working on, which I didn't even mention.
Let's dive into that for a second. Many of our readers or listeners might not be interested, but I'm deeply interested in this. You recently have done an MFA at Savannah College of Art and Design.
Almost.
Almost completed an MFA.
Yeah. I'll be done. I'll be done in June. Yeah.
How did that come about? And are you extremely happy with the experience, somewhat happy, dying to get finished?
I'm extremely happy and dying to get finished. But no, when I came out of college, I really like when I was like 22, 23 years old, I wanted to get an MFA in creative writing and write fiction and be a professor, and that's the path I wanted to take. And my mom talked me out of it. She's like, "You're going to be poor. You're not going to have any freaking money." So, um, so I did a complete 180 and went and got my MBA instead and went to Wall Street. Now, finance was also a passion of mine. I was very interested in it, but my real passion was writing, and I put that off to the side for a number of years. And then 3 years ago, I took a camping trip with my wife, and it was in the middle of summer, and it was really, really hot, and I could not sleep in the tent. It was like boiling hot. So I got out of the tent and I sat by the fire all night and I started to think about where I was in life and the fact that I had this goal that I used to have that like was unfinished. And I said, I'm going to go back and get my MFA. So I was 46 at the time. Um, and when I got back to the house, I applied to SCAD. And about a month or two later, I got accepted. And yeah, the past 3 years, I've been going to school, almost finished. So I'll be done in 52 days.
That's incredible. And you note that your favorite course so far has been writing for digital communication. What's that about?
Well, I wouldn't say it was my favorite course. I'd say it was the one that probably I could have taught the course because I've been writing online for many, many years. One of the projects in the class was to start a blog. And there was a number of platforms you could have chosen. I chose Substack. So I started writing this Substack. And, after I wrote about 8 or 10 blog entries, and they were all personal essays, I said, maybe I can make a book out of this. So what a lot of people do with Substack is they try to monetize it by charging for subscriptions. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give away all the content for free, and then I'm going to sell a book at the end. So that's what I did. And the book is Those Bastards, 69 Essays on Life, Creativity, and Meaning. And I actually didn't, the book doesn't have all the essays that were online. I saved 10 that are new, but yeah, that's the book.
I remember in our last podcast, we were chatting a bit about Substack, and you said that the engagement on Substack wasn't initially what you had expected, but then I've gathered from your subsequent tweets that the audience grew very nicely. How are you rating Substack as a platform right now?
Substack is great. I just, I don't want to be, I don't want to charge for it, so basically Substack makes money when people set up paid subscriptions, and then Substack takes a 10% cut. So, but Substack doesn't do anything about this free rider problem. Free riders like me, like I'm never going to charge for anything on Substack, and I basically just get to use the platform for free. So, for the time being, I can do that. But yeah, it's a great platform.
And you found that it's very active. Are you thinking about doing some Substack notes instead of Twitter, or in addition to Twitter?
No, I won't do that. I'll just do the long form essays. Yeah, I'm not going to do Substack notes. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that you began reading before the age of 2, and you now have an intense interest in literary fiction. You mentioned that you're currently writing for literary journals where you say the audience is quite small, maybe 8,000 people or so per journal. Why do you want to diversify into that area, the super highbrow literary fiction that has very small audiences?
Uh, that is a good question, my friend. Because it is very hard. It is very hard. Um, no, I mean, I have always wanted to be in that world. Um, like it's kind of I'm gonna mess this up, but I'll try to explain this. So, I am a popular writer, right? So those bastards sold 2,500 copies in the first week, which is absolutely amazing. Lots of people like to read my stuff, but my writing tends not to be super highbrow, and I want to basically raise my writing ability to the point where I can get published in some of these literary journals. So I actually did get published in one. I published a short story in a literary magazine called Sensitive Skin. I got published like 6 weeks ago, and it was one of the happiest days of my life. And it's a very cool short story. It's called Glowing. So that was really the first step. And
So is it sexual in nature? I'm not familiar with that
no,
journal.
it's not really. It's about a 23-year-old girl living in Utah who's getting her PhD in economics at the University of Utah, and she's at home on summer break, and she starts peeping in people's windows. She becomes a peeping tom, basically. And it talks about some of the things that she sees and the risks that she's taking. It's really about our our subconscious desire for self-sabotage. That's really what the story is about. And it's a very cool story, but not even the best one that I've written. So,
And you mentioned along the way one writer who's among your favorite, Barry Hannah, who I have never heard of in my entire life. Is uh could you acquaint us with his work very quickly?
Barry Hannah is in the literary world, he's every great writer's favorite writer. Like if you ask all the top writers who their favorite writer is, a lot of them are going to say Barry Hannah. Barry Hannah never sold more than 7,000 copies of any book on their first printing. Never sold more than 7,000 copies of any book. And yet he's considered to be one of the best writers. So when you ask me, like, why do I want to do this? Like, why do I want to get into this literary world? Like, it's, you know, I want to be appreciated by people whose opinion I care about deeply. You know what I mean? Like people who really understand literature. So, with Barry Hannah, I mean, he lived in Oxford, Mississippi. He passed away about 10 years ago. His writing is like just fantastic and not lucid, and he really writes for men. Not a lot of women like his writing. He really writes for men. He's just fantastic. So if you want to read any Barry Hannah, read the short story collection Airships. Fantastic stuff.
Well, I am a fan of literary fiction, and I'm embarrassed to say I'd never heard of him before I read his name in your book. Do you have a few favorite writers in the area of literary fiction?
Barry Hannah, John Updike. Um, those I would say are the top two. Maybe Alice Munro. I would say those are the top three, and of course Alice Munro. I mean, those are the best of the best. Alice Munro won the Nobel Prize. Updike was just a giant, so they're the best.
Yeah, we need a new Rabbit series for the modern era. Best finance writers, which is a totally different genre, but can you name a few of your favorite writers in finance?
Actually, I can't for a couple of reasons. One, I'm very picky about finance writing. I mean, but also like I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want to leave anybody off the list and then have people get mad at me and stuff like that. So I really don't want to like talk about best finance writers. So
Yeah, you have some gems of advice in those bastards, and one of them is that the best way to career success is to never say anything bad about anyone. Right?
Yeah.
So with your SCAD experience, I have had the pleasure of walking around that campus, and it looks like quite a fun place to be. You mentioned that you've done most of the degree remote. Have you had the experience of attending live classes?
No, I've never attended live classes, but I've had to go down there a couple times. One for basically my oral exams, my 45-hour review. So I had to go down there for the oral exams, and I had to go down there for my thesis defense. So I've only been down there twice while I've been doing the degree. Um, so
And I take it that the fellow students are quite impressive, and you feel like you're learning from them, even though everything is remote.
yeah, actually, I used to be very dismissive of online education. I used to think it was kind of fake and, like, how is anybody learning from this and stuff? And I think it kind of varies by discipline, but with writing, it's perfectly well suited to learning it online. Like, there's I don't want to say there's no benefit from being in a live class, but basically, you're writing stuff and you're posting it for feedback and you're revising, like it's perfect for online education. So I don't really feel like I've missed out on anything by getting the degree online.
That makes sense. So I want to go to some individual scenes from your book, and hopefully you can elaborate on them. You have one piece where you mentioned that one doesn't get ahead by being a pessimist. And I notice on Twitter that you sometimes dunk on people that are perma bears, because it is a very common thing in the finance Twitter world. Perhaps because perma bears in our generation have all gone bust and Twitter is the only thing left. I don't know. But um, do you find that there is sort of a shortage of optimists, if you will, in the econ Twitter space?
Well, I think there are optimists, but I don't really like the optimists either, because I think the optimists tend to be index fund proponents, buy and hold index funds, dollar cost average, everything's going to work out in the long run. And it's really like a logic issue I have with that. Basically the stock market returned 9-10% a year for the last 100 years, right? So people extrapolate and they say it's going to return 9 or 10% for the next 100 years. But the conditions that led to the previous performance may not be present for the future performance. Like there's no rule that says that stocks have to return 9% forever, right? So what are those conditions? Well, one is, property rights, the rule of law, peacetime, favorable politics, like all of those, like those are the conditions that led to the returns of the last 100 years. And I'm an optimist, but I'm saying, look, like there might come a time where, and this happened, if you bought stocks in 1929, you didn't break even until 1946, 17 years, right? And my problem with this is that nobody can withstand a drawdown of 89%, which is what the stock market did back then. Nobody can buy and hold and dollar cost average for 17 years. So it really becomes a behavioral issue, right? Because people can't withstand drawdowns of that magnitude. So that's my issue with the optimist. So I think everybody is done, right? So like I have problems with both philosophies.
Well, I think your argument makes complete sense that you can't extrapolate from the ex post most successful country in the ex post most successful century and say that those returns will come forever. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
In our last podcast, you had a wonderful thing to say about the Federal Reserve, which I think I'll never forget. You say that it's an institution that's driven by embarrassment, by fear of embarrassment. How has that played out over time? Like, where do you see the trajectory of the Fed now?
Well, if you think about where the Fed was in 2020, 2021, when we first started to see inflationary pressures, they said inflation was transitory. And that is driven by the path of least embarrassment, because the Fed they looked at this and they said, okay, we have two possibilities. If we raise rates, we could be right and we could be fighting this inflation, or we could be raising rates prematurely and cause a recession for no reason. And which would be more embarrassing for the Fed? What would be more embarrassing for the Fed would be to raise rates prematurely and cause a recession when they didn't have to. So it's all driven by politics. It's all driven by optics. And where the Fed is right now, is like now that the Fed is in inflation fighting mode. If you think about the path of least embarrassment, what is better for the Fed? For the Fed to continue hiking rates and they cause a recession and inflation comes down, or they pause hiking rates and inflation picks up again? Which of those scenarios do you think they'll be most embarrassed? The second scenario, obviously. So they're gonna have a bias for being hawkish, and they're going to continue to raise rates long after they should have, which has already happened. So yeah.
I have to say it fits quite well. You had another tweet that was interesting the other day, which is something that I've long noticed, which is that the Fed has very inflated payrolls. You noted that. I think it's something quite incredible. It's like 23,000 employees at an average salary of 350,000 or something like this. Like their payroll is around over 4 billion, I think. It's quite a
I don't think that was my tweet. I think that
Oh,
was
okay.
somebody else.
I'm sorry.
But it sounds like something I would say.
Okay. On the personal level, you say that you've become quite successful in recent years, presumably from Daily Dirt Nap mostly. At one point, you say that you're probably in the top 100 writers in the world in terms of gross pay. But as a matter of personal habit, you like to stay hard, as it were, and you don't treat yourself to so many luxuries. You say that in New York, just to keep yourself in line, you often stay at places that are around 200 or 300 a night, even including the pod hotel. So take us through this theory of personal behavior.
Yeah, it's funny because I literally just booked a trip up to New York for my book signing, and I'm staying in the pod. And the pod, if you don't know, is a hotel in New York. There's a bunch of pods, but the one I stay in is pod 39. And it's the Japanese style teeny tiny rooms with a twin bed. And it's a clean hotel, it's a nice hotel, it's comfortable, but you're in this tiny room. And I've done that. Like I've stayed in New York for like $800 a night. Like I just can't do that. I can't do that. Like it's so I try to keep my expenses down. I don't live really at my standard of living. I live below my standard of living.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it behaviorally, I think. Now the top 100, that is a high bar. Like writing is a tough, it's a tough area, but the top 100 still gets you into a high level of earnings. Would you say that it's mostly coming from the newsletter and the accumulated subscriber base that is there with the newsletter?
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And do you find that there's not much turnover there?
My newsletter has a very high renewal rate. I have a renewal rate of around 80 or 85%,
Oh,
which
that's
is the
fantastic.
highest that I've ever heard of. Yeah, it's ridiculous. So once I get a subscriber, I tend to keep them for a very long time. Um, but basically I make 90% of my money off the newsletter. And I still enjoy the Daily Dirt nap, and I put a lot of time into it. But it basically pays for me to do the writing that I really want to do, you know. So
Yeah. And your approach is sentiment driven, where you say that you're sort of a born contrarian and you're very attuned to when people are getting carried away in one direction or another, and you try to go the opposite way. Is that a fair generalization?
that's basically it. Yeah.
And your method is Twitter sphere, kind of listening to public conversation. Is that how you're getting the lay of the land?
Well, it's a lot of it is Twitter. That's probably 80% of it. But basically, if you want to be a sentiment trader or a sentiment investor, you have to have your eyes open and be paying attention to TV, radio, movies, pop culture, music. You also have to, in any conversation you have with anybody anywhere, you have to listen for sentiment cues. If you're talking to a home builder or real estate appraiser or even your hairstylist, like that, you talk to just basically average people. And for example, this is a very recent one. I do a radio show Thursday mornings locally. I go on the local morning show. I'm like the finance guy that goes on the morning show, and I get there, and the hosts are just they're talking about the dollar, like the dollar losing its reserve currency status. And these are not finance people, right? But that tells you how far this theme went. It got down into Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. The local radio hosts are talking about the dollar losing its reserve currency status. That makes me bullish on the dollar, right?
Right.
Like for sure. So
I like it. Um, I want to talk about one incident that happened when you were a trader at Lehman Brothers. You separately in the book note Nassim Taleb's observation that finance is depraved, and that and you make the observation that if you sort of put a trading floor at 2x speed and put it to the soundtrack of mine, 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 it would fit pretty well. There can be a lot of greed in the trading floor. One thing that happened to you when you were a trader, you said that you were making markets, I gather, in ETFs, and someone called you with a very large transaction for 250,000 shares of XLE. And a moment later, Exxon did a surprise secondary and XLE tanked, which presumably this person knew. What would you say is the culture on Wall Street behind a transaction like that, where, I don't know, it would be equivalent in fantasy sports to sort of having inside information about some injury and doing a trade in your season-long league, knowing something that no one else in the league knows. What are the ethics there on Wall Street?
Well, so that trade is what you would call a pick-off. I don't know if you've ever heard that term before, but
Yes.
a pick-off is where you basically catch somebody sleeping and you pick their pocket on a trade. And the thing with Wall Street is that it's a relationship business, right? So, and I talked a little bit about this in the book. Like, there are occasions where people do non-economic things for each other because they're trying to maintain a relationship. So we had a bunch of clients that traded with us regularly, and we took care of them and they took care of us, and it was a two-way relationship. This particular client never traded with us, and they came in on this one trade. So basically, like, we didn't have a relationship with them to begin with. So they weren't in danger of blowing up a relationship. In fact, they chose us specifically because they didn't have a relationship with us. So,
And so they did burn you, and presumably you talked bad about them to everyone you could, but it didn't matter so much because they didn't have a relationship with you or anyone
yeah.
else. And when you say that they caught you sleeping, it's literally by a matter of seconds, probably not by anything longer than
Yeah,
that.
just a matter of seconds. Yeah. Yeah, I don't, just to be clear, I don't think they had inside information on the secondary. I just think they got the news quicker than we did and they reacted faster. So,
Right. Um, in the genre of novels about finance, and I look forward to reading All of the Evil in This World. I haven't read it. In that genre, what do you think are the best examples? I read the book Trust recently. I thought it was quite good. Tom Wolfe has a couple. What do you think are the best in the genre of fiction that's around finance?
I don't really think there's much, honestly. Tell me what there is. Like, I don't think there's a lot of like finance novels. Like, there's a guy named Jay Newman who's actually a subscriber to the Daily Dirt app. He wrote one called Under Money, but it's really like a financial thriller, right? It's really it's a thriller. It's not like literary fiction. You know what I mean? So,
Right. I would say that Trust is literary fiction. And that was quite good. Certainly a close cousin to literary fiction, and it managed to sell a large number of copies. Something like Bonfire of the Vanities, I would not say is literary, but it's maybe the best example. I don't know. As you say, there's not so much in that genre. Jay McCurney has done a couple of pieces that are based around the finance world. But you don't have any favorites, really.
no, I'm not aware of much out there in that genre. Like, and a lot of I mean, even a book like American Psycho, like, which takes place in the banking world, it's not really about banking. You know what I mean? Like, so it's really hard to find a novel that is really about finance, takes place in the financial world, but you know,
Yeah,
so
it has the same problem as like fiction around poker, for instance, because there was the movie Rounders. You probably saw it. It was a fantastic movie,
sure.
sort of played a part in starting the poker boom. And then people were hungry for other poker content, right? Other poker fiction. And it was slow in coming. I think the reason is that poker is an empty activity. It's really about the money. So you can't really
Well, you see, the thing with poker is that it takes place in your head, which is the same thing with finance too. Like, if you notice, there's a million cop TV shows, there's a million lawyer TV shows, there's a million doctor TV shows. you can see an operating room, you can see a courtroom, but really, like on a trading floor, all the drama is going on inside your head. It's a very difficult thing to depict on a like in a TV show or something like that. And I think it also applies to the literary world.
Yeah. Jonathan Frenzen's The Corrections has a substantial sort of financial market interaction, and that's quite a good book. But yeah, you have to have it as a sideshow. You can't really have it as the central story unless you're doing a thriller or something along those lines. You have some contrary takes in the book. One of the takes is that people don't guard their time very well. And you say that if a big part of your productivity has been knowing what you're good at and safeguarding your schedule so that you're really focused on those things. You mentioned that kids' activities can be a killer for many people's productivity. Was that a conscious decision that you made career-wise, you and your wife as an academic, to not have kids, or?
Yep. Yeah, that was a conscious decision. Yeah. Yeah.
And you sort of say that it's the biggest use of time for many people, and that it's a trade-off maybe that people don't know that they're making. Is that fair?
Yep. That's a good way of putting it. Yep.
What other trade-offs do you see people making with their time that you think are more complicated than they think? I remember my ex-father-in-law one time, he said never play golf. Golf is a career killer. And I thought that was interesting because I had never even framed it that way. And then I have another friend who's a poker guy, very successful. He's been successful in many different areas. And he says he never goes out for dinner, which again is like kind of a reframing for me that doesn't make any sense because it's one of my favorite things in the world to do. But he says people don't realize how much time they're wasting in every single way. They're wasting time, they're wasting money, they're wasting time preparing for the dinner, going to the 3-hour dinner, coming home and being tired, being hungover the next day. So he just sees it in a way that I had never kind of even conceived. But where else do you see people making time trade-offs in ways that maybe they don't understand the cost?
Well, really, it comes down to entertainment. Two things really. So streaming services, so Netflix and Amazon Prime and all the streaming services, and also social media, which includes Twitter, but also Facebook and Instagram and everything else. These are all big time sucks. You know what I mean? Like, I don't work in an office with people, but when I did, it was all the conversations were about some show that was on TV, that people had gotten sucked into. And did you see this episode? And did you see this episode? And it was kind of the social currency that people were talking about. But that's, if you get home at 6 and eat dinner and then spend the next 4 hours watching shows, like that's a huge waste of time. I only did that once in my life. It was around 2003, 2004. I got sucked into 2 shows, House, which was fantastic. I still love that show, and Lost, right? And like in that period of my life, like I was really depressed and I kind of needed some mindless entertainment, but it was also the most unproductive period of my life. Like I was just getting home and watching TV, and 4 or 5 hours just disappears, So, the one thing I do nowadays is that I watch baseball, but I don't really watch it actively. Like I have the MLB network. I turn on the Yankees every day and I have the game on while I'm working on my computer. But I don't really watch it actively, so to speak. So football is another one. Watching football on, I have a good friend here in Myrtle Beach, like Saturday and Sunday during football season, college football and pro football. he's sitting on the couch watching football the entire weekend, you know.
That's a time suck. Your MLB habit sounds more like the way Obama would work, where after dinner he would retire to his office and turn on the NBA and read presumably confidential reports about what was going on in the world.
Yeah.
You also note that working out is a complicated trade-off that most people don't consider. It takes a lot of time, and you say that for the most part you're not doing it. But I don't know whether that's explicitly based on the trade-off, but you say that most people kind of don't consider any real cost to go along with the benefit of working out.
Yeah, I mean, I think the essay you're talking about is You're Not Successful.
Right.
And I started off that essay by talking about my brother who is a workout fanatic, like spends hours a day in the gym. Um, and I told the story about how he went on like a corporate outing and he was going rafting and he puts on his life jacket and he's got these arms with these muscles and his muscles are rippling and he's he was a triathlete, he was a bodybuilder, and this guy looks at him and says, "You're not successful." Because he could tell just by looking at him that he wasn't working. He had 16 waking hours, and instead of spending it working, he was spending it in the gym, and he wasn't successful. You know, so we all have 24 hours, not even 24 hours a day, because we have to sleep. Got to sleep 8 hours, so we have 16 hours a day that we have to decide what to do with. And the most important decision we make every day is what to do with those 16 hours, how you allocate your time, you know. So
Another contrary take you have in the book is that you think the worst way, not the worst way to die, but you think a bad way to die would be to die peacefully in your sleep, and that you would like instead to have a long and painful death where you're able to set your affairs in order, you're able to grow from suffering. So most people frame cancer, for instance, as like the worst or among the worst deaths, but you say not so much.
no, it's absolutely no. I want to get cancer. I want to die of cancer, and I want it to be slow, and I want it to be painful. For both the reasons you mentioned. One, just because if I die in a car accident, like it's a mess. My wife has to untangle all my affairs, all my financial affairs. Like it's a disaster, right? Like if I die slowly, I can get my affairs in order over time. But one of the things I say in the book is that we have to grow spiritually all the way to the end. And you grow spiritually through suffering, right? So a lot of people say they want a quick death because they want to escape that suffering, but I actually welcome it. Like that is actually how I want to die.
I've never seen it framed that way, but it's quite interesting, thought-provoking in the way many of these pieces are, I have to say. You mentioned among your top 5 favorite memories in life, one of them is DJing early in your DJing endeavor. It's clear from your writing that this is one of the most enjoyable things that you do. What is your taste in music? You classify a certain lowbrow versus highbrow music distinction. You seem to be highbrow EDM. I don't know if I'm doing it any justice, but maybe you could explain, where are your musical tastes? What are some artists that you admire quite a bit?
Well, it is electronic music, and there's a whole bunch of different genres in electronic music. Most people, when they think of electronic music, it's EDM. EDM is a genre, and it's a type of stuff that you would hear in like Hakkasan in Las Vegas, like in a Las Vegas club, like super high energy. It's not even really house music; it's EDM. And I like the underground stuff. I like underground house and techno that is a bit more artistic. And I'm a super annoying purist about it. I mean, I could mention some producers to you, but it wouldn't mean anything to you. It's definitely not anybody you've heard of before. But I like the really deep underground stuff. And, the funny thing about that stuff is, I play it live when I DJ and people love it. They go bananas over it. And they come up to me afterwards and they're like, what are you playing? I've never heard this before. It's amazing, which is really like the best compliment you can give a DJ, because really what a DJ, and aside from just mixing the tracks, like a DJ is imparting taste, like he is selecting music to play to other people. And, I'm a curator. Like I curate this really great progressive house and people like it.
People that can't attend one of your shows, is there a spot on SoundCloud or Spotify where they can find mixes, or no?
Yeah, I'm on SoundCloud. Just look on SoundCloud for DJ Stochastic. I actually have a pretty big SoundCloud following.
I love it. You mentioned Nine Inch Nails as someone that fits your taste. Do you like The Cure as well?
I like The Cure. Cure is not my favorite from that era. I mean, I was more of a Depeche Mode person. So
Yeah, The Cure is going on tour soon, so
yeah,
kind of
there was
hoping
a
that.
big controversy about the ticket prices I saw.
Why would there be a controversy? Because they underpriced their tickets.
Yeah, and Ticketmaster didn't want to let them. So
Oh, yeah, that sounds on brand for Ticketmaster.
yeah.
But their first concert is in New Orleans, so I'm kind of hoping Nine Inch Nails would join them a bit on stage in New Orleans. Wanted to ask you a couple questions about the Daily Dirt Nap. The group that listens to this podcast might include potential subscribers. Um, do you ever send out physical copies?
No.
It's all
I
electronic.
thought about doing that in the beginning, but it's just too much overhead. So yeah, it's all electronic.
I would imagine it's too much overhead, but some of the guys that have been doing it for a long time, like Jim Grant and what's his name? Solikoloff, who does What I Learned This Week. They both have paper versions that go out to their older subscribers, which is quite interesting, but it seems sort of unnecessary.
Well, so in those two examples, so Kirill with 13D research, like he charges a lot of money. He charges like 12,000 a year, so he can send out paper copies. Grant charges, I want to say 1,000 or 1,200 bucks a year, and I know he has about 10,000 subscribers, so he's doing about 10 million a year. But my guess is that overhead really eats into his profits. Like I would be shocked if he's making more than a million or maybe two a year with all that overhead, because he's got analysts and printing, and it's a lot.
He does the conferences, which are really great, actually. I've been to a few of them. Have you ever thought about doing a meetup of some kind?
I know I have a conference. I actually have a conference here in Pawleys Island in 2 weeks. Is my
Oh,
annual
sick.
conference.
Oh, sick. Where is it? Pawleys Island? I'm not familiar. Is that a geography or a
It's a
hotel?
little bit south of Myrtle Beach.
Okay, sweet. And that's like a 2-dayer?
Yeah.
Nice. Who are the journalists the financial writers that you find yourself interacting with most frequently? You respect their opinion and are picking their brain often.
Um, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know that I'm picking journalist brains that often. I mean, I'm friends with Jennifer Ablan at Pensions and Investments. Like I'm good friends with her. I have a couple other journalists that I'm friends with. Um, but I'm not really, I don't really have like a professional dialogue with them.
You mentioned that you're writing a book on
I
personal.
guess you would count Eric Balchunas, who's the ETF analyst at Bloomberg. He's a guy that I talk to quite a bit.
Yeah,
I'm sure there's some others. Yeah.
You mentioned that you're writing a book on personal finance that centers around one core idea. Of course, you don't leak that idea. I gather that this book is coming out relatively soon. Can you give us anything on this book?
I can't really, it's coming out in January, and I can give you the title, because the title, it's already up on Amazon. So it's called No Worries, How to Live a Stress-Free Financial Life.
That's a good title. And it's aimed at a very mainstream audience. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
I love it. All right, Jared. Well, thanks so much. This was great. This is my favorite type of podcast, to read a book that I really enjoy and then chat with the author about it. So I'm deeply appreciative.
And once again, the book is Those Bastards, 69 Essays on Life, Creativity, and Meaning. You can pick it up on Amazon.
And I'm going